It is in this spirit that we denounce the DA's court challenge against the Employment Equity Act.
Because we're getting forms sent to all the employees saying, you've got to identify as black, colored, Indian, white, male, female. What happens if Michael Bagram identifies as black? Are you going to tell me I'm a liar and put me into some sort of race register? It's going back to what we saw under apartheid.
Their 2024 Employment Equity Report found that despite comprising just 7.3% of the population, white workers held 62.1% of all top management positions. Surely that would unsettle many who would then push the minister to be deliberate and rejig the system through the quotas.
What we've got now is a system that has not worked. It's an old anomaly where you take something, it doesn't work, so what you do is you try and make it more harsh. It's not going to work. It definitely won't.
But they still chose to have some sort of an anomaly here where 7.3% of the white population occupies 62% of top managerial posts.
What I'm saying is the system that led to that anomaly. We need to train, we need to educate, we need technical colleges. We need to move people through the ranks, not by forcing. And I've been practicing in labor law now for 40 years. Who's come to me and said, I didn't get my job because I'm black.
But universities are churning out a lot of graduates daily. Black people are graduating in numbers from very prominent universities. So if we're saying we need to skill, what are these universities doing?
Well, tell me which individual. Let someone come forward and say, I didn't get the job, I didn't get a promotion because I'm black. I don't...
Guys, so as you can tell, I'm really passionate about this whole thing with BEE and any topic that has to do with BEE. For me, the first time anyway, I'm coming across this because we really didn't have this in West Africa, all right? So this is really new for me and really interesting. And I like the back and forth debates that actually go, because I'm really interested in what's best for South Africa, what's best for the South African economy, what's best for the business economy, what's best also for the black economy, or those who have actually been called or described in the terms of this new legislation, this Employment Amendments Act, those that have been historically disadvantaged. Because if South Africa must move forward, there has to be wisdom to come together and tact on how to really balance the excellence that the government business community can put forth in South Africa, but at the same time compensate for those that have actually been termed those that are historically affected by injustices of the past, so to speak. So Michael Bagram, now this is another perspective, this is another viewpoint of his argument, the argument from the DA, in terms of, how it is that the South Africa, the unemployment rate in South Africa is actually now, I used to argue that it was at 33%, almost really high, than that of my own country, Nigeria. But now Michael Bagram is actually now arguing that it seems it's even going to 42%, and that South Africa might be getting close to an Arab Spring where people will not be able to, take this anymore, because this has actually, according to him, has been as a result of a continuous experimentation of an Employment Equity Act for the last 20 years that has not worked. And so his argument, and this is the argument of the DA is trying to take this to court, is to argue that instead of sharpening the knife, in other words, I think there's now a new kind of like new Employment Equity Amendments Act, right? That Michael Bagram sees as sharpening the knife of something that actually has not worked. Rather than sharpening the knife, why not just change the knife totally and find a new knife? So this is the metaphor that Michael Bagram and the DA actually wants to challenge this BEE kind of law now in the court. I think it's around May 6th, probably tomorrow actually, or next tomorrow. I'll be following this, closely. But before we begin this analysis, I think it's really important to understand the ANC's perspective on this whole thing with the Labor Day. And this is a part of Fikile Mbalula's speech. He was blasting the DA for what he calls the DA's attempt at, overturning transformation in South Africa. And this is really important to understand. That's why I think this video is a really important video. You have to watch till the end, because Michael Bagram of the DA is actually arguing that there are many legislations in South Africa that have been put, I think, in support of this whole thing of the ANC's push for transformation in South Africa that seems to be slowing business down. It seems to be like a punishment to business. But Fikile Mbalula, on the other hand, in this portion here, you watch it now, he's blasting the DA, arguing that the DA seems to be, constantly in a push to grab power and actually, override the gains of transformation that South Africa has actually achieved under the ANC. I really don't know how to explain and understand that statement, but I want you guys to listen, share your thoughts in the comments, and I'll be back for Michael Barham and this interview where he actually argues that South Africa should not be celebrating Labour Day, but South Africa should be lamenting about Labour Day.
Our steadfast rejection of the DA's attempt to use the VAT increase as a political extortion underscores this commitment. Behind the scenes, the DA was not only bargaining for budget concessions, they were pushing for a new labor regime that will allow employers to dismiss workers without due process, dismantle affirmative action, and roll back transformation. We will not relent in defending the progressive, legal, and constitutional framework that protects workers today. Will never allow the working class to become collateral damage in budget negotiations. Instead, the ANC will continue to champion a growing, inclusive economy that brings more South Africans, especially young people, women, and rural communities, into the labor force with dignity and security. It is in this spirit that we denounce the DA's court challenge against the Employment Equity Act. It is not only a legal maneuver, it is a calculated political stunt launched on the eve of Workers' Day, aimed at reversing 3 decades of democratic gains. These are the people yesterday who said they are opposed to VAT increase because they are defending the poor. The next day they wake up, they are in court, and what are they doing in court? They are attacking employment equity. What is employment equity? And who benefit out of employment equity? And why would you challenge it and want it to be reversed? It is these workers. It is the rights of the dispossessed over the years that we fought for and that we will defend. We will defend these rights even through the government of national unity, as we do today. And we will do that even tomorrow when we celebrate the Workers' Day. This is part of a broader pattern. As we warned ahead of 2024 elections, the DA has consistently opposed transformative legislation. The Bella Act, the NHI Act, the Expropriation Bill, and now the Employment Equity Amendment Act. Just on the eve of Workers' Day, they are in court, all of which seek to restructure power, ownership, and access in our society. The DA's hatred for transformation has become shameless. In the Western Cape, under the DA leadership, employers are advised not to comply with equity legislation, and South Africans are told not to expect preference in employment. An illegal and immoral policy that betrays the principles of common citizenship and constitutional redress. This is made worse by the DA-aligned campaigns of Solidarity and AfriForum, who tore foreign capitals like the United States to spread lies about the ANC lynching minorities, treasonous distortions that insult the spirit of unity and undermine our democratic sovereignty. And thanks to South Africans, black and white, who have come to the fore, dispelled and dismissed these lies, not only here in South Africa, even in the United States soil and in the corridors of the White House. We have done that as the ANC too, talking to people across, even in the United States, about these distortions about our country.
Yes, so now Michael Barham and this SABC journalists are now actually trying to debate and make sense of this thing. The argument from the SABC journalist here is that, it actually appears that it says that in South Africa, there's an argument that 7 7.3% of the whites occupy 62% of top managerial positions in South Africa, all right? And that's actually sounds, that's really, to the journalists here, it sounds really bizarre, because South Africa has actually churned out continuously graduates from their universities. And she's wondering, what have these universities been doing? How is it that we're actually churning in graduates, that graduate from, University of, or some of the Stellenbosch University, the University of Cape Town, some of these high universities. When I even travel around the world, I actually see some of these graduates. But she's now wondering that how is it that these universities are churning out graduates, yet we still see that as this small percentage of the whites in South Africa, 7.3%, occupy 62% of the managerial posts. So she's actually trying to make that kind of like argue that what's really going on in the university. Michael Bergram is also kind of like responding, arguing that that those numbers are a result of the system, a system of employment equity amendment, so to speak, for the last 20 years that seem to have continuously produced these numbers, these statistical numbers thereabout, to the point where we have much more whites at top managerial positions and less, especially when she argues that they're from a smaller minority, so to speak, in South Africa. He's actually arguing that, the reason is because, there has been lack of training, lack of vocational training and all of that in the country. And so it may be, if I'm hearing him correctly, it might have been difficult to find top managerial positions from these disadvantaged, populations to actually replace those. And if they are not able to find the required number, or probably those with high skill enough to function at top managerial positions, then it would be counter effective to now fire or retrench the whites who are actually managing or holding this top managerial position, because the economy is not growing. He's actually arguing that if the economy was growing, it would have been another story, but the economy is not growing. And so to retrench those who are the top management positions because they are white, because of the fact that the universities have been churning out a lot of graduates, and that there's poor representation at the top managerial position, racial representation, then now there has to be new race laws to balance that. He actually thinks it's counter-effective, because at the end of the day, what would drive the growth in the economy in South Africa would not necessarily be performance based on race, but to be performance based on merit. And so this is what I think I'm hearing Michael Barry actually argue, and what this might be the basis of why the DA is taking this whole ANC BEE case to court, which you heard from Mbalula. He's actually blasting the DA, arguing that the DA is actually against transformation. The DA hates transformation. The DA has been vociferous against transformation, and they will give it all they can to make sure that they fight this particular case, to make sure that racial quotas, or these quotas that this new Employment Equity Act is actually trying to pursue, would be, the basis for employment in South Africa. Let's quickly listen to Michael Berriam and this really, really intelligent but fierce also interview between this SABC journalist and Michael Berriam from the DA. Debate these really sensitive issues. And if you're really a lover of South Africa, I would actually encourage you to watch till the end, because we really have to now have a collective, so to speak, a collective mindset, a critical mass of, opinions on how we can actually work so that there can be an employment equity system that ensures growth for business in South Africa, but at the same time compensates for those that are actually being called those that have been disenfranchised by the historical evolution of South Africa going forward. And share your thoughts, guys, in the comments.
The African National Congress has described the Democratic Alliance's court challenge against Employment Equity Amendment Act as anti-transformative. The DA launched the court action against the Minister of Employment and Labour, Nomakosazana Meth, on International Workers' Day. The party, which is a major stakeholder in the Government of National Unity, says Section 15A of the Employment Equity Amendment Act introduces rigid national race quotas in the workplace. However, the ANC is of the view that through this court action, their fellow GNU member does not want to see transformation. The ANC has pledged to strongly oppose the DA's legal challenge to Section 15A of the Employment Equity Amendment Act, accusing the DA of opposing transformation. The DA claims the Act promotes racial exclusion, not genuine redress, and says the case is about protecting constitutional rights. The court challenge comes as GNU parties prepare to renegotiate their working terms. An expert has weighed in on the matter, and the case is set to be heard on May 6th. Now, to talk more about this, we're now joined by DAMP and spokesperson on employment and labour, Michael Bagram. Michael, good evening. Thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Now, this court challenge of the Employment Equity Amendment Act has received mixed reviews. I'm sure you're well aware of the position of the unions on this matter. They've been very critical of this move, including your GNU partner, the ANC, which has said this reveals your true colours as being anti-transformation. Just talk to us about this court challenge and the aspects of the new regulations that are of concern to you.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for having me on air. And we're certainly not anti-transformation. We're looking quite carefully at how do we get the redress of the wrongs of the past. And it's something that we need to move on, because we've had almost 25 years of employment equity and it's gone worse. Now, you can't tell me that you take exactly the same tool, you try and sharpen it a little bit, and you want to have a different result for the experiment. That's a sign of madness. The reality is social engineering in the business community is not working. We need to find other tools. We need to find another way to ensure that we have proper redress for the wrongs of the past. It's still not working. It hasn't worked, and we've got a problem. Now, the issue is if you get a blunt tool like Section 15A where you set quotas, there's no science to the quotas. It doesn't take local situation into account. And then we're introducing a race register all over again, because we're getting forms sent to all the employees saying, you've got to identify as black, coloured, Indian, white, male, female. What happens if Michael Bagram identifies as black? Are you going to tell me I'm a liar and put me into some sort of race register? It's going back to what we saw under apartheid. And it didn't work. It's a real problem. We need to actually take something different. We need to deregulate, especially the small business community, and we need to create jobs. The economy is shrinking.
I want us to expand on some of those alternatives that you have. But firstly, what of those who say the department is correct and must remedy what should be viewed by all as an anomaly? Because their 2024 Employment Equity Report found that despite comprising just 7.3% of the population, white workers held 62.1% of all top management positions. Surely that would unsettle many who would then push the minister to be deliberate and rejig the system through the quotas.
Well, the point is you need to rejig the system, not through quotas. You need to actually look at different system. What we've got now is a system that has not worked. It's an old anomaly where you take something, it doesn't work, so what you do is you try and make it more harsh. It's not going to work. It definitely won't. What the business community is doing is it's
But if you sharpen a knife, it probably could cut better, wouldn't it?
Well, it'll cut down the employment in South Africa, yes, certainly, and we'll have people then outsourcing, computerizing, and we've seen that around the world as well. What we want is we want to actually enhance the small business sector. The only way you're going to do it is to deregulate, not regulate even more. We saw the late Tito Mboweni at the time, when he was the Minister of Finance, he was also a Minister of Labour, said that if you deregulate the small business community, it will immediately, that was then, he said it will immediately employ 2 million people.
So
I work as a labour lawyer on this, and I know that's the way it's working.
So are you saying, because many could say they had all the liberties now, but they still chose to have some sort of an anomaly here, where 7.3% of the white population occupies 62% of top managerial posts. You're saying that it was the regulations that led to that kind of an anomaly, and that now if you move away from regulations and give them more liberties as the business community, then they'll do right and actually consider fair employment here in this instance?
Now, I'm not saying it's the regulations that led to that anomaly. What I'm saying is the system that led to that anomaly. We need to train, we need to educate, we need technical colleges. We need to move people through the ranks, not by forcing, because then it stops growing, and that's what we've seen with our economy. We need to grow our economy. We need to take into account the diversity. I don't know of any individual, and I've been practicing in labour law now for 40 years, who's come to me and said, I didn't get my job because I'm black.
But universities are churning out a lot of graduates daily. Black people are graduating in numbers from very prominent universities. So if we're saying we need to skill, what are these universities doing?
Well, tell me which individual. Let someone come forward and say, I didn't get the job, I didn't get a promotion because I'm black. I don't. We've got laws that say that you can't have that discrimination. What we need to do is we need to encourage the business community to move the diversity upwards. We can't do it by tying the hands behind the back of the business community. It's not going to work. It hasn't worked. You're telling me we've had 25 years of employment equity where you could actually take people to court, and yet it's getting worse. We have now 42% unemployment in this country. When the economy is not growing, you can't expect people to now retrench whites management and push people upwards. It's not going to work. It doesn't work. And so what we're finding is that people will rather import their clothing, for instance, instead of manufacturing in South Africa. It doesn't make sense. We want to build the business community. The experiment that you've shown with employment equity in South Africa has not worked. We can't keep taking that same experiment and trying to make it more and more harsh. What you're really doing is you're implementing social engineering, which the nationalist government did. And that didn't work. It fell, it collapsed.
But what of those that would still look at those figures and say, here, you've got a private sector that didn't operate in good faith. They cannot say that of the majority who are black, there were really not that many managers that could have emerged. Many of the graduates couldn't have emerged, where you have a majority, 62.1%, then coming from a population of 7.3% of the white community. What of those who just say, based on just the stats alone, it seems that the business community, with all the liberties, did not operate in good faith here, where they disregarded fair opportunity or equal opportunity?
I don't believe that, because, like I said, let's look at the let's look at the examples that you have. And yes, you've got the numbers out there, and yes, that does reflect it. It's not right, and we should find a way to actually correct that and reflect the demographics. But we found a way that is making it worse. Now you're telling me those figures. If you told me those figures 10 years ago, it was probably not as bad. So why has employment equity failed us so badly? It wasn't just open season at that point. It was employment equity. No, not one business wanted to have equity improvement. They wanted to improve their equity, and they were improving their equity. But now what we're seeing is they're just going to make it more harsh. The experiment has not worked. It's been 25 years of employment equity legislation, and every year unemployment gets bigger. Every year we see the stats coming out, and we've got people standing on the street with graduation certificates. It hasn't worked. Find something different. We have to look at it more carefully. And it was a genius like Tito Mboweni that came up and said, if you leave the business community and unregulate to a large degree, we'll find more and more employment. And we're all living in Ship, South Africa. No one wants to say, well, I'm not taking that person in because they're disabled. That's not true. Government itself said that we're setting a target, this was 10 years ago, set a target of 3% of employment in disabled. They're the biggest employer in the country. They never reached even 1%. Why is that? Were they discriminating against the disabled community? No, I don't think so. I think what they were doing is trying their utmost to get in more of the disabled community, but somehow the system wasn't regulated too much that it landed up with only less than 1% working for government. How do we explain that? How do we explain the 42% unemployment? Our youth are at 70% unemployment, and it's getting worse. We're very, very close to saying that it's very similar to an Arab Spring, where people will not accept this anymore.
Michael, thank you very much for your time.